Hi, and welcome to this lesson on Agile's natural advantage. So, what is the best approach to drive up ROI? Well, we have a couple options. We can either use speed, scale, efficiency, or maybe we emphasize quality. Well, this question was posed to one of our great representatives of Agile, Adrian Cockcroft, and what he said and how Netflix became one of the most popular and profitable companies in the world today is simply this: speed wins. And the reason why is because at scale, only speed can solve your problems. And the way that you actually are able to achieve speed is through focus. In fact, one of our best examples from our previous courses, the speed course, the Agile leadership course, is of course Southwest. Southwest was actually the best stock to invest in from 1972 to 2002. They grew by almost 26% annually. Oh, and by the way, the average operating profit for an airline is like 2 to 5%. But the way that they did it may surprise you. They just focused on one thing: how to be the best low-cost airline. That meant that everything else was no longer a priority. There was no first class, no meals, no assigned seats. Only profitable shuttles were ever chartered between locations that could actually support having a shuttle. And they only used one plane model, the Boeing 737. Think about how much efficiency that offered them. This kind of focusing on just one thing comes to us via the power priorities, and that's in the Pareto principle. If you don't know who Pareto is, he's an economist from the 1890s. And what Pareto principle says is that 80% of the output comes from 20% of the producers. The way that Pareto found this was by measuring peas in a pod. He was not just an economist, but he was also a gardener. And he did what economist gardeners do: he counted up what happened in his garden. And what he found was that 80% of the peas came from 20% of his pods, because he was an economist gardener. And as a result, he then said to himself, wait, this is a natural system, and it's not normal. It's completely unbalanced. Where else would we see this kind of thing happen? Well, he saw that 80% of the land in Italy was also owned by only 20% of the families. And so as a result, we actually see this rule everywhere that we look. It's called the 80-20 rule, and it's also known as the law of the vital few. Basically, only a few things really matter. But here's the trick. The trick is you can actually apply this twice. If you have a set of 25 items and you take only the top 5 items, then that's going to account for 80% of your value if they're fully prioritized. That means you're going to get a 16x ROI by focusing just on those 5 items. However, you can apply this iteratively and take just the number one item, just one thing out of 25, and it's actually going to account for 64% of the total value. That is a 42x ROI if you just focus on one thing. That's the reason why you see this incredible difference in value between Southwest and all the other airlines. They focused on the one thing that really mattered, being low cost. By applying it twice, one item accounts for 64%. So where else do we see this focusing on one thing working best for people? Well, why don't we take some of our biggest companies that are the most popular in the world? Google makes 60 to 70% of its revenue based on just search ads. Apple makes most of its revenue based on the iPhone, and now it's transitioning somewhat into apps. Basically, apps in the iPhone, that's it. That's where they make all their money. Small firms almost always get 60 to 70% of their revenue from just one client. And if you take a look at how you spend your day, you spend 60 to 70% of your day usually working on one type of project. Most of your day, 60 to 70%, is spent at work. And if you think about the time that you're supposed to be asleep and supposed to be awake, you're supposed to be awake for about 60 to 70% of the time. This is the reality that focusing on just one thing and the 60 to 70% ratio that comes from applying the Pareto principle twice is true in almost every system. Every system, every business driven by one thing: the constraint. So how does Agile treat this? Well, we treat it by searching for the one thing in small batches. We go through a build, measure, learn cycle. You build a product, the minimum viable product. You measure it. You get data to see if you got it or not. You learn whether or not you targeted the right part of the system. Then you get new ideas about how to improve the system again. This means that when we execute a sprint and we are releasing a potentially releasable increment, we're sending it into the buyer system so we can get real feedback to know, are we hitting the one thing? Are we actually making any improvement to it? Or do we miss and we need to retarget again? realizes itself in our planning using the rolling wave, which many of you may know if you've been taking the other courses. But the rolling wave basically shows this. At the highest level, we have capabilities. Capabilities are what we talked about before, changing throughput or lowering costs. We want to release capabilities on a regular cadence, and we're going to plan them out farther in advance. Then when we go down in terms of details to the features that make up those capabilities, we're going to plan those out maybe just 2 releases in advance. Stories, we're going to plan it out for just a release, and then tasks, we'll do it for this sprint, or maybe for just the next story. This kind of rolling wave, as you see it here, it allows us to level out how much we plan to the level of detail that we need to plan it. And anything that is farther away from us, we plan in lower detail. Anything closer to us, we plan in higher detail. This kind of natural advantages are what make Agile so powerful as a delivery mechanism. Now we're going to talk about in the next lesson how you can continue to use these natural advantages and never fail again. We look forward to seeing you there.